All right, everybody, thank you so much for waiting. We say 6 o'clock, but we usually let people come on their standard time, which is always 6:30 to 6:45, so always wait. Also with today, this is a maze of a place. I've never been here today, so give yourself a round of applause for finding your way here. Yeah. I saw a whole bunch of missing people in the change room where I was also lost. So I made it out, which is fantastic news for me and I guess for you guys. So my name is Ron Chinzer. I have my partners in the back. They're here as well in the audience with you guys, lots of people from the Toronto Police Service. And we're here to talk about this, the Integrated Gang Prevention Task Force. But before we get into it, the issue is so deep and we've learned so much over 3 years through both research, talking to different police services, as well as actively dealing with gang members in the city of Toronto and their families. And combining all of those perspectives into one, we're starting to see a very large picture of what's actually happening. And it isn't just with the police and the gang members and their families, but it also has to do with their schools, the communities that they live in, the communities that they victimize, the family members of the victims of gang crimes, the probation and parole officers, the jails, the courthouses. We've spent 3 years in depth with all of these different organizations to start get a bigger picture of it. And part of that is it becomes so overwhelming at some point, but also very simple to what the potential solutions might be. So before we get into there, I don't want to bombard you with information that might not be relevant to you. So I'll ask you here, what brought you out today?
We're tired.
Did everybody hear what she said? By raising hands, who agrees? For those of you who aren't here for any of those reasons, and you don't have to answer if you're not comfortable answering, by all means, that's okay. But if there's something that you're here particularly for, or something that happened to you that you said, you know what, this happened to me, or I saw this, or I heard this, and I'm uncomfortable, if anybody's comfortable sharing that, I openly advocate for that. And in the course of this presentation, as much as it's a presentation, it's more to let you know what we've learned, as well as the framework from what we want to do going forward, as well as who's in that framework. But this is very much a conversation. This is our 23rd town hall in 5 months. Every week, we're at least at 1 or 2 different communities that are very impacted by gangs and gang violence. And I'll explain to you how we ended up here a little bit later on. And what we're learning very quickly is that each neighborhood is completely different. The east end of the city versus the west end, it's different. North versus south, it's different. You could have 2 neighborhoods that are exactly beside each other. They're 5-minute walk, but they're completely different. And the importance of acknowledging and knowing that is to know what are the needs of the community and what are the impacts that are happening to you. Because what might work in Parkdale, for example, or in Jane and Finch, might not work here. And the last thing we want to do is just blanket the entire city with 1 or 2 strategies and say this is going to solve it. It's not going to solve it. We need to know from the inside out what's actually happening and what's going to work for you here. And I'll get a little bit more to some of the feedback we've got from some community members and what's been so valuable for us and what we end up doing with it. And what we do end up doing with this ultimately is this isn't just a meeting and you're never going to see us again. This is one part of something much larger. And that larger part is taking action right after this. Say, okay, we've done this. We kind of have a better understanding now. What do we do from here? So before I get into that, think of this as a conversation. Any question, anything you want to share as we go on, this is for you guys. It's not for me or for my partners back there. By all means, put your hands up. Just let me know, and we can work through that. Is everybody good with that? Good? Perfect. So the Integrated Gang Prevention Task Force that started 3 years ago. And how it started 3 years ago was we were working at Guns and Gangs, and one of our higher-ups, Deputy Chief Jim Raymer, who's second to the chief, all right, he's really high up there, comes down to the Gun and Gang office, and he said over the last 15 years, we go out and we arrest thousands of gang members, we seize hundreds of guns every year, we seize thousands of pounds of drugs, we seize millions of dollars. It's great, but if you look over the last 15 years, nothing's really changed. We haven't caught up to how quick gangs are evolving. So the additional strategy and the initial thought was, how do we get a gang member out of a gang? So I'll ask you here, if you were tasked with that, knowing what you know or whatever information you have or experiences, if you were tasked with the idea of how do you get a gang member out of a gang, what would you do? It's difficult, right? It's a beautiful sentence to say. It's absolutely beautiful, but when you actually have to do it, it becomes very difficult. Yes, ma'am. So what you bring up, it's 100% what we want to know, right? Because one of our partners out of many is community housing. Yep. So don't think whatever you say here does not get back to them. We have some people taking notes in the back so that we never forget this. We don't put down who said what. We go back and say this is what we heard and this is where it needs to be addressed. Well, the good news with that is we do have neighborhood officers that have started, which are designated to your specific neighborhood for a period of 4 to 5 years. So exactly that's something that the feedback was taken where we said we need to designate some police officer there all the time, or at least regularly, that's there outside of a crime scene or something bad happening. Just somebody there as a fixture to be part and embedded in the community. But what you mentioned, I think the highlight and the key point of this is what makes this so difficult. And this is something we never really thought about until we had to actually experience it. The difficulty is sitting on this fence, and this sitting on this fence of balance. So if you notice at the beginning when I asked you and I said, how do we get a gang member out of a gang? The conversation became very much how much they victimized you and how much they terrorized communities. So then the conflict becomes, if we want to engage and sympathize and empathize with somebody who'd become a gang member from the age of 0 to 21, at what point do we have a hard line to say, yeah, we're here to help you, but if you cross this line, you have to be held responsible for what you do. So, sorry, give me 1 second, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, in the back. Not at all. We've dealt with 70 gang members. Out of the 70, what I'll tell you is we've only had some success with one of them. And the reality is that guy would have got out on his own anyways. We just happened to be at the right place at the right time. What you mentioned is a reality that they're stuck in. And we don't necessarily look to extract everybody out of a gang. Sometimes what we do is we leave them there and we try to build them up from the inside out. What better than somebody inside of a gang that you can change their mindset and their perspective and build them up to have greater influence on everybody else? If we extract that one person out, there's a real reality that if anybody ever finds out, they're going to be in big trouble. That's why with what we have, we don't ever tell anybody. There's not even the police officers we work with don't know who we deal with. That stuff is very kept in. Before we get to that, I want to go through the framework because I think some of the framework might answer a lot of the questions. But as we go on, by all means, remember your thoughts. So really with us, when we got tasked with figuring out how do you get a gang member out of a gang, there was a few things we had to look at. We wanted to be as objective as possible. And what I mean by that is, subjective is kind of like what I've seen on TV, what I've maybe seen in my police work, what I've seen on movies or music, and the picture I paint of what a gang member is. And as soon as we started to look at how do we actually do this, we had to catch ourselves or caught ourselves in the thoughts we're having to say, wait, it can't be that simple. And it's not that simple. So we had to look at three big things right off of the bat. The first one was, what exactly is the purpose of a gang? Because when they say, okay, you got to get a gang member out of a gang, the first thing you really got to know is, well, what is a gang? And I'm not talking in terms of how do we prosecute them in court? That stuff we already know. It's more of what is a gang to a community and how are gangs classified all over the world? So we did research and we had found three things, but I'll ask you here, if I were to ask you what the purpose of a gang is, what would you say it is, in your opinion? Yes, ma'am. All right, but when we looked at it, we thought of the same thing. Now, what you had mentioned, all of it's right in terms of the people that are in gangs, but some of what you said are reasons people join gangs, but they're not really the purpose. What the actual purpose is, and we looked worldwide, and we found PhDs who did all these academic publications, and we said, okay, we want to have an educated lens as to what do we need in a gang for us to say this group is a gang. And I'll tell you what those three are. Those three are right here. All right, what you actually need are these three things. You need a group of people who deal drugs, they control a territory, and they collect debt. Those three are the core of every gang all over the world. Now, this isn't all that gangs do. Gangs do a lot of things, but this three is the core, and these are changing. These are changing, but all over the world, these three are the main core things. So what are the other things that gangs do besides these three? Bullying, right? But what do we, so bullying in criminally, we call it intimidation, they play a game. What else do they do? How do they victimize people? Extortion, great. Yes, ma'am. Source of protection, right? So it's all that stuff in there. But let's talk about crimes. But it is a source of protection, 100%. But a protection from what? What are they being protected from? Yeah. What is it? What do you think they were doing? From other gangs, right? But then when you say I need a source of protection, what is the worst thing that could happen to somebody from a gang? Yes, sir. The law. But what laws? What type of activities? I want you to imagine you're a police officer and we have to look at all the crimes that gang members do. So what are the crimes besides drug dealing? Trafficking in drugs, right? And sex trafficking. And human trafficking, right? That's a big issue. There's also firearm trafficking, so they're dealing guns, and what else? Murders. Assaults. Sexual assaults. Break and enters. Yeah. So if I were to look at the big crimes that happen all over the world, and the big crimes that happen in the city of Toronto, gangs do all of them. It just so happens these three have to be the core for a group. So for example, is there a basketball court in your community here? There is. There's a basketball. Let's say downstairs, I were to go down right now, there's a bunch of kids, all right? And let's not play any games here. This is a gang impacted community for sure. And let's say we go downstairs right now and there's a bunch of kids playing basketball. Knowing this is a gang-impacted area, is it fair for us to go down there and say that group of kids is a gang?
No.
Not at all. Not at all. Because they're not doing any of this. That's not part of kind of what they do. So it's not fair to come into a community like this and think that all these kids that are playing, that might be teenagers or young men or young women hanging out, are gang members. It's terrible. It's not, you don't do that stuff. It actually makes things 10 times worse. The idea is to stay focused on what do we need to know and what we're dealing with. So that's what a gang does. The second part becomes, well, who joins a gang? So let's describe somebody who joins a gang. Yes, sir. How old are you? 38. You're a smart boy. How old are you? You're 10 years old? You are very intelligent. Where did you learn all this stuff? YouTube? No, yeah. You know what? You're a very thoughtful boy. You should keep that up. But I'll ask you here, if you were to describe to me somebody who joins the gang. Yes, sir. Control, right? So they feel like they have a lack of control. So I want you to picture the person we're talking about. You had mentioned something really good. You said kids under grade 5. Yep. All right, so a kid under grade 5 who feels a loss of control. Just think about that for a second, all right? You, sir, are in grade 10, or sorry, you're 10 years old. You're 10 years old, grade 5. So we have this young man right here who's also an entrepreneur in the making. All right, we have this young man here. He's 10 years old, very intelligent, so you're special. You're not the same as most 10-year-olds I come across, including my own. But think about this as a 10-year-old who feels a loss of control. Without any sort of academic background, without any sort of psychology or family counseling, is that healthy? No. If you're 10 years old and you feel a lack of control, what else do you feel? You feel unsafe. And when you're a child, feeling safe is absolutely essential to growing up to be something productive and positive. So when we look at a very young age to somebody who's seeking power, we look at it as power because it's very simple to do. It's surface level. But deeper than that, it's a lack of control, a feeling of a lack of control that stems to many other things. Sorry, somebody else had their hand up before we go. Yes, ma'am. I'm very glad you brought that up, and I'll bring it. I'm going to come right back around to it. There was somebody else in the back who had their hand up. So I'll give you a scenario because we had done this. So right off of the bat, we got tasked, get a gang member out of a gang. First thing we have to do is find out, okay, what is a gang? What are we actually looking at here? The second thing was, well, who joins gangs? And we did this. I spoke to many police officers that I respected, that were educated, that were experienced, and I said, okay, what do you guys think, and girls? And we had the exact same conversation. And then I went to schools, I talked to teachers, we had the exact same conversation. And the more people we spoke to, the conversations tended to be the same, and we realized that can't be that simple. All right, it's these issues we're talking about. We can highlight one or two parts, but could we go on all day about all the things? Yeah, for sure. And that made a big issue for us to say, where does this ever stop? This is never going to stop. But then we started looking at it a little bit objectively, and I'll play a game with you here. And I do this everywhere. And this is the idea, we gotta be open and honest here, all right, as best as possible. And I don't want anybody in the room to feel offended. This is not to make anybody feel offended. The idea is we have to start just pulling out what we believe, all right, and what you actually believe in. And what I mean by that is, if you have an individual experience, that's 100% true to you. Okay, and nobody can ever take that from you. And don't ever feel like that's going to be devalued. But the important part of this exercise is to get it out there in the open, to realize that your individual experience is not necessarily the blanket and absolute truth. That there might be other stuff happening. And that, yeah, what happened to you is terrible and it's horrible, but it's not everybody who's like that. And we need to reframe this. So I'll imagine this. I go into my pocket and I pull out a magic pill. And with this magic pill, I say to this room here, we have to work collectively, and we need to find a gang member in the city of Toronto, and we have 1 hour, and when we give them this pill, they are going to be super smart, they are going to develop businesses and make a business, and they're going to be a multi-billionaire, they're going to be a hero, there's going to be a statue of this person in their community, they're going to leave, going to be known throughout the world, and then they're going to come back to this community and create thousands of high-paying jobs and be a role model for thousands of kids that would otherwise become a gang member. But we have 1 hour to do it. So the first thing is we need to describe what this person looks like, and the second thing is, actually we'll reverse that. The first thing is we need to know what part of the city we go into. So we have 1 hour to find a gang member. 1 hour collectively. So you tell me, give me an intersection in the city that I should go to. And we're going to change this kid's life. Keep that in mind. Sorry? Yes, ma'am. Is everybody okay with that, or should we pick a different area? Any other areas? Everybody's good with? Okay. Now I get there. Okay, now we have 45 minutes. And we got to give this pill. This pill's going to expire. We're going to lose this opportunity. We're going to change millions of lives. This is going to be a story they're going to talk about forever, and we all get to be part of it. All of us. Say, we did this together. Okay, so the person I'm looking for, is it a boy or a girl?
Could be either.
Yeah, but listen, we're down to 30 minutes. It's a girl. Everybody's good. We're going to find a girl. We're going to change her life. How old is this girl? 17? 17-year-old girl. Let's describe the clothing, because I'm sure there's a lot of 17-year-old girls there. Yes, sir. Sorry? Pink?
No, black. Yeah, black hoodie.
Black hoodie?
And short shorts.
Short shorts? Skinny jeans? Sorry? Sorry? Suggestive. What does that mean? So she might be in trafficking. Yes, ma'am.
Eye makeup and a long hair and ponytail.
So long hair and a ponytail?
Yeah.
Does she have earrings on? Big hoop earrings? Guys, I don't think we need to go any further. Oh, wait. This young man said a tattoo on the neck. Yes, ma'am, you're going to say something. Black ripped jeans. And Vans shoes. So we got Vans. Jordans. Okay, wait, no, we're not done yet. So we got a girl, 17 years old. She's got her hair back in a ponytail with highlights. She's got big hoop earrings. She's wearing Jordans. She has black jeans, a black hoodie. She might be trafficking right now, in terms of she might be involved in human trafficking.
And just not know latest.
Okay, and does she have a cell phone or headphones in?
And she's probably got 2 cell phones.
2 cell phones. Okay, 2 cell phones. You said headphones? And AirPods. And are they both in?
Yes.
And is she listening to music?
No. And she has a backpack on.
And she's got a backpack. What type of backpack? A
No,
purse.
a backpack.
No, it's a backpack because they want to look like the school kids, so the police don't bother them. Oh.
So are we going with backpack, or are we going with purse? All right. What type of backpack? JanSport backpack. What color is the backpack? Black backpack. This is great, guys. We're down to 15 minutes. We have a really good description. I'm going to go to. And I find a girl that looks just like that. And I say, you're a gang member. Here's a pill. I'm going to change your life. What are the chances? How many girls am I going to find in that neighborhood that look like that?
A lot.
And how many of them are gang members?
Very few.
Probably less than 1%.
Yep.
And the reason we do this exercise is to get this garbage out in the open and to say not the problem, and I understand where everybody comes from. We have to get this out in the open and say that's not the case. And the real problem we have when we fall into that is that there are 99 girls there out of the 100 that are not that get treated that way by everybody. And the problem with that is if you get treated a certain way, for those of you in a relationship, if you have a spouse and they always say, you're always cheating on me, you're always cheating on me, every time, and you're super loyal, how long do you go before you say, you know what, I'm just going to do it? Because they already think this every day. It's the same thing when we do this garbage to young men and women in neighborhoods that are gang impacted, and we just drop in a description and say, got to be a gang member. How long do you go before all of a sudden they say, okay, everybody thinks this of me. What choice do I have? And the reality is that's happening a lot, not just by community members, not just by police, but by everybody and anybody that has these connections and focus points with them. And what we have there is we have a complete overgeneralization of somebody in a neighborhood that they really don't have a choice for many reasons but to be in that neighborhood, and they just follow a certain culture for many reasons, some of it being protection. You know, if you live in some of the really tough areas in the city of Toronto and you don't look the part, you're going to be a victim.
We have young girls who are dealing drugs
Sorry?
in our community who are being forced by the dealers to do it,
Yeah.
whether they want to or not.
Well,
They don't have a backbone and they don't have a voice.
Well, you know what? We expect things from kids. All right, when I say kids, I'm talking 21 and under. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking 18. I'm talking 21 and under. When we expect things from kids that we don't even do ourselves. And let me break it down. Who's a coffee drinker here? Who's a coffee? Hands up, coffee. He outed you right away. He pointed you out. You're a coffee drinker, right? So look, we got coffee drinkers here. Perfect. Let's say you guys have a coffee every morning. You wake up. You got to have your coffee, right?
Yep.
How are you to deal with when you don't have a coffee?
I'm a beautiful person.
You are a liar.
Actually, if I don't have coffee, I just drink pop because it's got caffeine in it.
Got it, right? But for yourself, you don't have a coffee in the morning. How is your day already started? Not a nice person. And for yourself, you don't have coffee in the morning. How are you? You're on a mission and a hunt because it's not normal, right? So what we know in our dealings with gang members over many years is that they're creatures of habits. They're creatures of habits. Now, for us, if I were to say to you, okay, I just need you to stop drinking coffee for 1 week, it is a massive obstacle that a good portion of us here can't do. So if we can't stop drinking a cup of coffee every morning, but we expect a 15 or 16-year-old kid to just see the potential that they have without ever participating in that conversation, that's an absolute unrealistic expectation, and that's an oversimplification on our part. Because what we think this is just an easy thing to get out of. It's not. This is something that starts at the age of 0, and it goes all the way up to 21 plus. And when you look at changing behavior and changing perspective and changing what you see, it doesn't happen overnight. If that took 15 years to do, it's going to take intensive work to undo. But it's doable. So the good thing is, we found a way to objectively identify people who are involved in gangs. And when you came in, there's these laminated cards. They're called gang risk factors. Have you guys seen them?
Yep.
So they're all over here. And what this is in 2007, Public Safety Canada, a federal department, put out a publication called Youth Gang Risk Factors. And what they said was they looked at gang members all over the world, and these are the commonalities in people that become gang members. And if you look at them, with the exception of the community category, none of them have to do with the police. And the reason I bring that up is because we're the ones leading this initiative. But when we saw that, we're like, hey man, I'm not trained in psychology. I'm not trained in dealing with mental health issues to the level that I need to be to help curb this type of behavior. We don't have the background or the education to deal with this. And if you look at them, none of them mention race, your gender, your religion, your ethnic background, your skin color, none of that stuff matters. Like, it absolutely does not matter. There are other things that matters, and those are the risk factors. And they don't all happen at the same time. They happen throughout a stage of life, which I'll get to. But the important part is when you look at that, the more of those risk factors you have, so imagine those risk factors are on a checklist. There's 36 of them, and you check them off, every one that applies to you. The more you check off, the more likely you are to become a gang member and join a life of crime. And if you don't have something called a protective factor, which is something to mitigate that risk, you're just doomed. If you look at it, and take a look at the risk factors even here, if you know anybody who has even 15 of these, what is the honest expectation for how they're going to turn out to when they're 16, 17? Let's just be real. If you have somebody who suffers from all those risk factors and there's nothing balancing it on the other end, there's nothing that says, hey man, we can kind of do something else. The reality is that they're not going to break out of that. It doesn't work that way. They just get sucked in. So you need these protective factors. So we had an objective way to start identifying people that were going to become gang members as they got older, and to start identifying with the current gang members that we're working with, what's actually happening with you. You know, what is actually happening? Where are all the issues that you're having that nobody knows about, and where can we mitigate those risks with protective factors? So what we did is we created this checklist. We educated 2,000 frontline officers on these gang risk factors over the course of 6 months. And then for 2 years, we had police officers on the front line refer people to us all the time saying, I came across this kid, I talked to the family, they're on the path to gang involvement, they might want some help. And all we did is we took them in, we figured out the risk factors confidentially, and then we got them connected with local free services. Said, okay, you know what, if you have trouble reading, we're going to connect you with a reading tutor. If you have a drug addiction or your parents have a drug addiction, we're going to connect you with drug addiction counseling. And we tried that, and it didn't work. It didn't work for a multitude of reasons, which I'll tell you the story. Yes, ma'am, do you want to say something?
Sorry,
No. Yes, ma'am.
Go.
So here's something, I'm glad you brought up that story, and congratulations for being sober for so long.
Thank you.
But you bring up a great point. This is something where the experience has taught us to start looking at things, and I'll get to the importance of parents and families, is, you know, you were a huge part of your daughter, both the good and the bad. All right, that's a fair statement. And how much help did you need before she got the help she needed? Yeah, so let's talk about your
But
daughter for a
not
second.
everybody does.
No, but here's the thing. It took that moment, which is a very extreme moment. Okay, don't get it twisted. That's not something small.
Broke my heart.
That's a very extreme moment. And
Broke my gut out.
now here's the thing. Let's just be realistic. If you were doing as much drugs as you're saying you're doing, what did you expect from your daughter? Exactly. But
Until
yeah.
I saw her.
And then you had a moment of clarity and insight, right? But how old were you, if you don't mind me asking, when you had that aha moment of, oh my God, 27. So 27 years, right? And that seems like it was been a difficult 27 years, to say the least. So a very experienced 27 years. And there are people in their 40s and 50s. I mean, I'm sure we all have friends right now. I have friends in their 40s and 50s that are more lost now than they ever were in their life. They are searching for who they are. But again, we have to be realistic with what is the expectation we have on 14, 15-year-olds. They cannot raise themselves. They just can't. It's impossible to do. You are not going to get a doctor that raised himself. You're not going to get an entrepreneur that raised himself. They need role models. They need mentors. They need positive connections in a community. They need to be attached to something to see something, which is a whole other issue, and I'll get to that. So we know right off of the bat, okay, the gangs that we're looking at, they deal drugs, they control territory, they collect debt. That's got to be kind of a core. The second part is the kids and the people involved in gangs, and what are the real issues? We have the risk factors. Well, the third part became, where do we go? And I'll tell you how we ended up in your community and why we're in 31 areas in the entire city of Toronto. It's this right here. Has anybody seen this before? For those of you who've seen it, what is it? Neighborhood improvement area. So the city of Toronto, sorry? Yes. So the city of Toronto was broken up to 140 neighborhoods at about in 2015, 2016. And they're broken up by what's called an equity score. And the equity score is based off of a few things. Some of those things have to be, or some of those things include, what does the family household look like? What is the average income of that household? What is the access to economic opportunities? What is the access to public transportation? What does the community feel like their voice is in terms of the development of their neighborhood? And what we had found was there's 31 neighborhoods that are considered neighborhood improvement areas. Now the good news is that the city, starting this year, as of January 1st, 2020, they're pumping in millions of dollars to the lowest equitable neighborhoods to get them up to an acceptable level. What that means, I don't know. But what I will tell you is I get emails every day from community development officers that say, hey, this is what we're doing, and this is where we're going to do it, and we're looking for people to help out. And if you're on Twitter or Instagram and you follow me, my handle's just Toronto Cop. I post all of that up online for anybody to apply for. There's things like funds, grants, programs, employment positions. There's a ton of stuff that they send me every day that I always pump out for people who attend these town halls to find. Yes, listen, so I'm going to tell you something, and we're going to get to this. We will never come together, ever, by blaming people. So right now we got to change our language as to whose fault it is, and we got to start saying, how do we fix this? What do we do from here forward? I can talk about in the past.
So
Listen,
now's the time.
I understand, but we got this narrative that we're drawing, because really what you're doing, I understand the passion where you're coming from. You're dividing people, and we can't think like that. And I'll explain why we can't think like that. Yes, ma'am. Listen, what you can do as a community, it's three simple things: say something, do something, and be consistent. All right, so the say something is, and I'll get through the story and you'll see what I mean, but just remember that. Say something, do something, and be consistent. It's as simple as that. But before we move on and we talk about that, I need to clarify this. So these 31 low equitable neighborhood areas, right? I said, perfect, all right, we're looking at these 31 neighborhoods. Well, what we ended up doing is, independently, within police intelligence, we looked at where do the gang members live and where do they commit the most violent acts. Now, if I were to take that map, and I were to take this map and lay them on top of each other, it's almost identical. That's not by accident. One of the risk factors is social disorganization, which means that sometimes environments matter more than actual people in terms of what is the behavior and what is the criminality. So now we had a way to look at what are gang members, what do gangs actually do, how does somebody from the age of 0 to 21 become a gang member, and where should we be in the city of Toronto right now. And we picked these 31 neighborhoods, and the reason we're doing these town halls was for the first 2 years, we ended up trying to develop these massive working groups with different government organizations, about 30. And the reality is we spent 2 years trying to formalize partnerships to share a common vision among the Toronto Police, the City of Toronto, the Toronto School Boards, the Ministry of Attorney General, CAMH, Children's Help Phone, anybody and everybody that was impacted by gangs, we tried to bring together. And we had a provincial election. And the back end of that is when you have a provincial election and you have government agencies, nobody wants to commit to a new idea because they don't know where money's coming from. So we lost a year of relationship development for the provincial election. And then unfortunately in the city, we had a city election for a new mayor, and the same thing happened at the municipal level. And all that time we were actively working with gang members and their families, and we were learning a bunch and still staying in the books and finding professors and academics in the field that specialized in this. And it dawned on us that the commonality and everything we looked at was communities were never engaged. So all this planning was happening without ever coming into a community and saying, what's happening here? Like, what's going to work for you? So we chose to do these 31 town halls to spend intensive work. And if you notice here, we don't have media. We don't have politicians for the most part. I mean, and he's always participated. And for that, thank you. And these are the type of people you absolutely need to champion your causes, because he's always out telling the truth. So anyways, we did these 31 town halls. We kept media away by accident. We kept high-ranking police officers away. And the reason we did that was not on purpose. Our first one that we ever did, we did it in Jamestown in the west end of the city. And it's a very heavily gang-impacted area. It has been gang-impacted for 40 plus years. And we did it there, and we didn't have the chief of police and the mayor and the media there. They all wanted to come, and we said, whoa, wait. The reason we said wait was we've never done this before, so I didn't want them all to be here, and it was a total disaster. So initially we did it as a way to say, okay, let's figure out how to do this so it looks good. But the feedback we got from that town hall was so important for us and so open. And afterwards we found out that a few of the community members said, hey, we appreciate the fact that this wasn't a media thing and this wasn't a pitch. This was an actual conversation. And we just kept that through. We said, okay, we're not going to bring in anybody. This isn't about a political thing. This is not about a strategy. This is about finding out what's actually happening, and most importantly, finding the community leaders and the champions in the areas. The reality to this is some neighborhoods don't trust the police, and I'm okay with that. We could waste 90% of our efforts coming to your neighbor, trying to build trust. And the other side to that is you might like me, but you don't like the Toronto police. Well, what happens when I go? What happens when I leave? Which is inevitable at some point. But the other idea was, if we can do these town halls and find the people like yourself who come out on a Thursday night in January, when it's probably a work night for everybody and there's school tomorrow, you're so concerned. You already have the trust and, most importantly, the influence in the neighborhoods you live in. We don't need to be the face of this. We don't need to have our names on it. We do not care. If we can empower you in the way that you need to be empowered to really start to enact change, which is very simple to do in a neighborhood if you have the right tools and resources, which we can provide, we have no problems. And in fact, we want to bolster everybody up who's here today to really make you power players in your own neighborhood. We don't need to do that. You guys can do that way better than I'm ever going to be able to do, but we want to be able to back in the resources for you. Yes, ma'am, you wanted to say something? So here's the thing. I agree with you. But again, the divisiveness in language is never going to solve this. And we got to get over the ego part of I'm right, they're wrong. And I'll tell you what, I'm not saying you're saying.
They're all wrong. I just think that
I understand.
sometimes we get.
How many times have you had this conversation with somebody? I'm going to let you know right now, if what you've been doing hasn't worked, you got to do something different. So I'm here to provide you what that different thing is, right? Because you can't double down on something that doesn't work and expect a different result.
That's why I'm here.
It does not work, and this is
That's why
perfect.
I'm here.
So I'm going to go through a story now, and in the interest of protecting the person involved, I'm going to blend two stories together, okay? Because this is a combination of the first gang member we ever dealt with and the combination of the last one we dealt with, all right? And the stories combined are horrible. The stories individually are horrible, but they are not unique. They are one of thousands in the city. And by going through this story, we're going to go over the risk factors and at what age they pop up. And you're going to be able to fill in the blanks yourself. And you're going to instinctively know, as just a normal human being who's healthy and who's in a loving environment and a protective environment, to say, oh man, somebody should have done something. Somebody should have said something. There should have been some level of consistency. So like I said before, say something, do something, be consistent. All right, so this guy we get, what happens is it's a police officer who arrests this kid and has a decent relationship with this kid. This kid's 15 years old. He gets arrested in a neighborhood in Toronto. He brings him back to the police station. When he brings him back, he says to him, hey, listen, man, I kind of know some cops who might be able to help you get out of a gang if you're part of a gang. And this kid says, you know what, man? He's 15 years old. He says, yeah, I am part of a gang. He goes, I'm interested to hear what they have to say. So we get the phone call. And we go down to the police station where he's arrested, and he's arrested for drug trafficking and some robbery offenses. So we get in there, right? Those are gang offenses. That's what he does. Drug trafficking, he's in there. Self-admitted gang member, for sure. He's continuing offenses, and his history says the same thing. So we get in there, we walk into the room, and for us, it was a learning experience to say, okay, how do we interview somebody outside of a traditional police interview? How do we interview somebody who has been grown and farmed to just kind of hate us, look at us as the absolute enemy? We have to break over that. So we develop a relationship with this kid, we have a conversation. And because he's under the age of 18, we had to include his mother. And we started to really get an idea of what was actually happening. And the beginning to the end, when you hear it, it's going to make absolute sense to you. And you're going to say, you know what, I might know somebody like that. So this kid, and with his mom, we learned many things. And the first thing we learned was, in the family risk factor category, there's about 8 or 9 risk factors in there. All right, and they happen from the age of 0 to 6. That's when these ones pop up. And if you look at them, they're self-explanatory. If you see any of the risk factors in a family and there's nothing to balance it out, you're going to have an issue. Well, the biggest indicator and the biggest behavioral thing to watch out for is that 3-year-old kid who's completely uncontrollable. All right, I'm not talking about the kid who stands up and pees all over the toilet seat. I'm talking about the kid who punches walls, who steals stuff from other kids, who bites and scratches. I'm talking about the one that the parent can't ever control. When you start to see that, I'm not saying this kid's going to be a gang member. What I'm saying is that's not healthy. There's something else happening with that kid, and that could be many things. It could be a chemical imbalance, it could be an illness, it could be many things, but in this case here, it's behavioral. Right? There's something with this kid where the behavior's off, and this kid in particular is one of 5 kids, and he's the middle kid. And mom says, out of all my kids, this kid was a pain in my butt. This is the one that just, no matter what, always causing me problems. So she says at the age of 3, this was the sign. All the other kids were kind of normal. So in family category, it's the uncontrollable kid at the age of 3. Well, this 3-year-old, he starts to develop some different habits, and these are the habits. And for those of you who have kids that are 3 years old, when you're at home and you're washing dishes and you hear the kids playing, is everything okay? Yeah, I can hear them playing. What happens when you don't hear anything?
They're up to no good.
Right? See, all the parents know. All the parents, we know right off of the bat, right? Here's the commonality. We say, wait a minute, I haven't heard kicking or screaming in 30 seconds, and you turn off the water, and you might turn off the TV, and you might have another kid, and you go like this, shh, shh, and you listen. And you go, I don't hear anything. There's a problem. So you wash your hands, you keep them clean, you slowly sneak to the bedroom or wherever they're playing, and you kick open the door like a cop, and you say, what? I got you. So mom says this, right? She says, this, I had to do this all the time. So right away, I'm like, yeah, I could see that happening. I have kids myself. I've done that before. But what happens to this kid is between the ages 0 to 7, we operate in what's called the theta wave, which is a state of hypnosis, and we're gathering information unconsciously, subconsciously, not to succeed, but what do we need to do to survive? So this kid, I want you to think about that 3-year-old kid, right? What happens to newborn babies when they don't get held?
They cry.
They cry, and what else? They cry. You know what else happens if you don't hold a newborn baby? They die. They die. Yeah, that's why they do skin to skin, right? They need to keep that baby connected. So this little baby at 3 years old, who's causing a ruckus, he starts to fire and wire neurologically in his brain that when I do this behavior, this is the result. 1 of 5, he's the middle kid. So anytime I do this naughty business over here, mom comes in and she yells at me, she screams at me, but this kid's 1,000,000%. So he's already connecting this subconsciously, all right? There's psychology behind this, there's biology to this. This is what's happening to this guy. So now all of a sudden this kid, he's got all these family issues. He's starting to understand that bad behavior has resulted in positive reward being attention from mom. And then he goes off to school, and at the age of 6 in grade 1, the most obvious indicator is school failure. I know this is Toronto when people say you can't fail school in Toronto, you can't fail in Ontario, but the reality is there's a very big difference in passing and succeeding. This kid doesn't succeed, he just passes. Because what happens in school? Who's the replacement for mom in school for this guy? Teacher, right? It says teacher's a replacement, and teachers are amazing. I love teachers. They are angels to me. That's a very noble and respectable and honorable profession. They want to spend their life growing people, which is beautiful. But this poor teacher has 25 kids in the class. This kid replicates the same behavior at home, in school. And when he does that behavior, what happens? What does the teacher do? Stops everything, right? And goes to that one kid. And I had a kid like that in kindergarten and grade 1 too. There was 2 boys, they'd always come and punch my sandwich. I don't know why. All right, always. And I always joke and I say, I am waiting for the day I pull them over, because I still remember. Hasn't happened yet, but I still got a long way to go. But I still remember those kids. And what does the teacher do? She says, man, this kid is so disruptive. I got to move this kid on his own. I'm going to bring in a special teaching assistant. I can't deal with this guy. I have to deal with the other 24 kids. So this kid gets isolated again, and then what's happening to that firing and wiring? What's happening to that brain connection? It's getting stronger. It says, yeah, this works. Not only does it work with mom, it works at school. So now you have a real disconnection from school. And the important part of school at the very early ages, it's not so much study habits, it's social skills. It's how do I fit in? How do I make friends? How do I work with a society? That's what school is at that age, as well as developing healthy habits and healthy relationships. But this kid has no idea what a healthy relationship is. So now we got the age of 3 is uncontrollable. Age of 6, we got school failure in the school risk factor category. And then age of 9, peer group. All right, and for those of you who live in community housing, and the reason I bring that up is because that's this kid. All right, and this kid, mom says to him at the age of 9, she says, listen kid, you got too much what? Too much energy? Get out of here, go play outside. I need peace and quiet. I can't deal with your garbage. I've already dealt with your garbage for 9 years. You're driving me crazy. Now you're old enough, go outside, get some fresh air. So this kid, he's out in the wild, 9 years old, first time he's out and about. All right, now he's out and about and he's kind of navigating the building that he lives in. He's navigating the lobby, he's navigating the hallways. He goes outside, he kind of hangs around the parking lot, and then he comes across another kid. Now let me ask you, this kid, more like him or less like him?
Less like him.
Opposite, more like him. So for the first time, this kid's run across another kid on his own whose mom told him what? You got too much energy, get out of here. And this kid's like, oh my God, I found you, you're just like me, we're both troublemakers. Oh, this is great. Your mom said get energy, dump your energy, I dump my energy. This is amazing. So now he finds this kid, and this kid says to him, I got some more friends over here. And then he goes out, and now this kid's life's changed. All right, I want you to imagine this kid who without knowing, he's a baby, he's 9. He doesn't understand the scope of things, right? But now he's 9 years old, he's made a couple friends on his own. He comes back home and he tells mom, I'm so excited, mom, I made friends. And mom's like, good, thank God. Now this kid's changed his attitude. He's super pumped up. And then something happens between 9 and 15. All right, and the biggest indicator at 9 is child delinquency. All right, and what child delinquency is, it's a word we took from the United States because it's fitting. And I'll ask you this, if we have 10-year-olds, right, 10-year-olds, if you have your 10-year-old kid that comes home from school, and your 10-year-old says, Mom or Dad, I was there, and another 10-year-old named Nick, he pushed me, he took my lunch money, and he said if I ever tell anybody, he's going to punch me again. What do we call that for 10-year-olds? Bullying, right?
I'm bribing.
Bullying and bribing, right? It's horrible. What do we call that if it's over the age of 12? Robbery and intimidation and extortion. The criminal offenses. Child delinquency is criminal acts being practiced under the age of 12. So when we see bullying, when you see the extreme attempts of it, that's not to be ignored. So this kid becomes the victim of delinquency, and then he starts participating in delinquency. He says, man, this happened to me. I gotta do something back, and then he goes and he gets back his own thing. And with this kid, he comes home, right? And this is a different kid. So for the parents here, again, your 9-year-old who's been a pain in your butt your whole life, comes home happy for the first time, says I has friends. A couple weeks pass, and then they say, Mom, Dad, all my friends have bicycles. I really want to go out. I need a bike. This mom is kind of happy, right? She's excited. My kid, finally, this might be the turnaround. I'm going to get him a bike. So mom hustles. 1 of 5. All right, she got 5 kids. She's a single parent. She lives in community housing. She's doing the best that she can. Somehow she manages to get this kid a bicycle. All right, in your own community here, let's say you give your 10-year-old a bike, and that 10-year-old goes out to the corner store. He's excited with his friends, and he leaves his bike outside, and he runs in to go buy candy. He comes out, where's his bike? Gone. So this kid, within a week, yes, sir.
I remember this.
So then you lost your, and when you came home, is this your mother?
No.
No? Are you, where's your mom? Where's your mom? Oh, you're at work? I don't know. Where's your mom?
Uncle.
Where's your uncle? Your uncle? Now, did you tell uncle your bike got stolen?
Yeah.
And what was your response, uncle? Be honest. You're not under arrest. I won't arrest you. Yeah. So I like how you were. I was surprised. Well, this mom loses her mind. All right. If that was me and my parents, my dad would. I wouldn't even got the word stolen out. I would have been in the hospital. He would have pounded me. Right. Like that was. He would have said, "Your bike, Dad. Somebody stole my." Boom. Right. So that's what happens to this kid. And mom says, you know, and the kid says, kid remembers, mom remembers, and they say, you know what she tells him? She says to him, you know, you dummy, you had one job. Do you know what I had to do to get this bike for you? You have any responsibility? You had one thing you had to take care of. This is why you can't have nice things. So she reams this kid out. All right. And then mom's like, oh man. And he feels terrible, right? Now this kid was feeling super high, feels terrible, has his bike stolen. Mom, You know, for us parents who yell at our kids, you know, you always feel guilty before bed. We always pop open that door a little bit, you give them a little kiss on the cheek, and you're like, I love you, but you're stupid, right? We think that, we don't say that. We love all the kids, but you think that, so you're like, I painted my butt, but I love you. We all do, we feel guilty. Mom does the same thing. A week later, she decides to buy this kid another bike. Same thing happens, all right? She loses her mind, this time double as much. Now, 3 times, oh my God, you'd have a bus pass at this point for life. So this same thing happens, right, 2 times. Now here's the interesting part. Here's where police get involved. So both times the bike gets stolen, they call the police. And we have the police reports to confirm this. So a police officer shows up, and hate to tell you this, there is no bicycle theft prevention task force. All right, it just doesn't, it's never going to exist. There's too many bikes in the city. There's 18 billion bicycles. If your bike gets stolen, the honest truth is, unless we come across it by accident, or you have a GPS on it, or you know the serial number, or you know exactly who has it, the likelihood of us finding it is pretty much slim to none. We might come across it by accident.
You
Yes.
know that most people don't know that they can go to the police stations and register their bicycles?
You
when
could
they
do it online.
purchase their children
Yes.
bicycles?
Yes. And if you have a computer, you can do it online. It's easy.
Yeah,
But this
it's
family,
amazing.
companies don't care. But here's the thing.
Exactly.
Here's the
because
thing.
They want you to come back and buy another bicycle.
Let me get back to this kid. So they call the police. We show up. We do a police report. Right? Kid says my bike got stolen outside of this, Marketplace. It's gone, and we're not going to find it. So, what is the value of that bike to that family? Is it up here?
Yes.
That's a huge value item to that family, right? That is like, oh my God. Now the honesty is to the police. Where does that go in a priority? It's like here. So we have an obvious imbalance, right? Because for us, what's up here is murder, shootings, domestic violence, terrorism, those type of things. Stolen bike, it's kind of like on a priority scale because there's no immediate threat to anybody. It's a bicycle. It's not that we don't care about it. It's just priority-wise, it's at the bottom. So we have a complete imbalance. And what happens is the family starts to have a disconnect.
We have more important things to do at this point.
Well, yeah, see, important is a funny word. And that's the importance of this is we're starting to learn things differently because I don't want to say to that family we have something more important to do. Because to them, this is like up here. And understandably so. But to us, it's like, listen, we got to solve some other stuff before we're going to have time to look at this. And there's a delay. So bike gets stolen, second time bike gets stolen. It's the same thing. So now they've had 2 experiences with the police where something of high value to them, which the likelihood of them getting it back is slim to none. So there's already a bit of a disconnect, right? Saying, oh man, the police can't do anything. They can't even find a stolen bike. That's how they feel about it. So now this kid, between the age of 9 to 15, horrible things happen. Horrible things happen. At the age of 12, he starts using drugs. At the age of 13, the friend that he started using drugs with was murdered. At the age of 14, he saw another murder. At the age of 15, he saw his 3rd murder. And then between 15 and 17, he was abducted twice at gunpoint and shot at so many times he lost count. All right, and that's kind of where we end up coming into play. So when we end up coming into play talking to him here, we're like, oh man. All right, so at age 3, uncontrollable. At age 6 in the school atmosphere, school failure. At age 9, child delinquency, being that they're practicing criminal acts. And then between 9 and 15, what happens is this kid becomes a gang member. And how we know this, he tells us. And at the age of 15, if you want to find out if a kid is a gang member, just ask him. If you have enough of a relationship with him, just ask him. You're in youth work, right? Yep. Will they self-admit?
Yep.
100%. For the police officers in the room, we've had dealings with hundreds of gang members. If I find a 15-year-old gang member and I say, are you a gang member? They will self-admit. Yes, I am. In fact, this kid was so self-admitting, he lifted up his second t-shirt and he had his gang on the second t-shirt. He says, yeah. He goes, look, here it is. So then we started talking about the gang. We said, well, how did you go from being a kid who lost his bike 2 times to becoming a gang member and arrested for drug trafficking and seen all these horrible things? And he says, listen, man, he said, when I was 12, there was an OG. And what an OG is, for those of you who don't know, is an original gangster or old-time gangster. And what they are is they're gang members in a neighborhood that everybody knows who they are and they've been around for a long time, right? Quote-unquote long time. And he says, one day I'm hanging out with my friends, the same friends I made at the age of 9, 10, the ones I'm hanging out with. And he says, this OG comes by and he befriends me and he says nice things to me. He says things like, I see a lot of you in me. I was just like you when I was your age. And why this OG knows how to say that is because that's what happened to him. So he knows exactly what he's looking for because he knows how to find himself in a crowd. He says, that was me, that was me, that was me. And he sees opportunity. So he goes in, he befriends these kids, he does very small things, and then before you know it, this guy is dealing drugs for him. Small time things, and they escalate to something bigger. And it got so big that now he was arrested for trafficking in cocaine, and he got arrested for some firearm offenses and for some weapons offenses, and we had him here. So when I asked him, I said, man, you were 12 when you got recruited in, 13, sorry, when you got recruited in. And I said, well, how old was the OG who recruited you in? How old do you think the OG was?
18, 19.
18, 19, anybody else? 20s, 30s maybe, somebody older?
OGs that are 15 now.
So,
in our city.
you know what?
It's gotten a lot younger.
16.
Yeah.
So we had a 12-year-old kid recruited into a gang by a 16-year-old. We're at the stage now where we have kids recruiting kids. All right, now this is where it gets terrible. So we'd worked with this kid. We had a solid relationship. And that relationship over the course of a few weeks, I was coaching him as to how to break his habits. So we focus on small things like breaking your habits. So what we do with them, and we do with everybody to figure out what's happening, is I say, describe to me your everyday. What happens when you wake up? What happens when you go to bed? And describe to me every day. And we started to realize the more we ask people is they're creatures of habits. They do the same thing every day with the exception of maybe Friday and Saturday. And there's a couple lessons from that too, where if you're asking somebody not to do something, you have to replace it for them. So it's like this, those coffee drinkers I talked about. If I were to say to you, don't have coffee for 7 days, very difficult sometimes. If I were to say, instead of having coffee, have tea, easier to do. So we learned through the course of dealing with these guys and girls that everything we asked them not to do, we had to replace with something positive. So we had to create that protective factor by removing the risk factor. So over the course of 6 or 7 weeks, we had a really solid relationship with this guy. I was texting him 3 or 4 times a week, just, are you okay? How's your day going? Nothing crazy where if anybody saw his phone, they'd know who I was. None of that stuff happened. It was just, hey man, I'm here for you. And he'd always text me at 3 or 4 in the morning. You want to know why? He was high and he was going to bed. And reality sunk in and he says, I don't want to do this anymore. So we had a lot of hope and faith with this guy, and then I didn't hear from him for months. We just had to paint a picture for him, create a new pathway, create a new vision for him by asking him, what do you want? What do you want out of life? How do we get you there? What's holding you back? And once we created a bit of a blueprint or a pathway, we just had to hold him accountable to it. We would just say positive things. I would say the dumbest things to him that to me were very small, but were massive to him. You know, small things like, hey, listen man, you're so smart with this stuff. You know, if you just spent another 10 minutes on this, you'd be at a different place. And constantly encourage him, constantly encouraging him. With the gang members that we've dealt with and for the youth workers in the room, they are very distrusting by nature because everybody's the enemy. They don't know if you're an opposing gang member. They don't know if you're going to call the police. They don't know who you are, so they're very distrusting. They have to hold this front, this armor that they build up. That is super easy to penetrate if you just stay positive and you stay consistent. And consistency is in the key, right? It is the absolute key. When I say you got to say something and do something and be something, it's absolutely important. The last part especially, and be consistent. With this guy, he had gone off, all right, and he has to be held accountable. The number one way to combat gang violence, academically, evidence-based proven, is to arrest the gang members. This is the other half, and this is where I said the difficulty lies. And this is a very tough part for people to swallow and very tough part for people to digest and understand and to stay neutral at. So we talked about this poor kid, right? Everybody feels bad. This is totally avoidable. It's totally fixable. It is, and it requires minimal effort, but it requires minimal effort from everybody, collectively. Just consistency in the messaging. That no matter what, whether it be at school, whether it be in the community, whether it be in housing, whether it be anywhere, there's adults in there that are positive role models that can just take 2 seconds out of their day and say, you know what? Hey man, you know what? You're a very smart boy. That's it. You don't want to know something crazy? We looked into this. If I were to say something negative to you right now, and being in a place of authority, being a police officer, or a parent, or an adult role model, or somebody respected in the community, if I were to say something negative to you, do you know how many positive things you have to hear before that starts to change? 17. So if I say one negative thing to you, it takes 17 positive comments for you about that specific thing for you to start changing your mind about that. 17. Now I can't do that for that kid. I can't do that for you 17 times in a day, but how many interactions does this young man have in his day? With how many organizations and how many people? And if we all just stepped up for 2 seconds, just 2 seconds out of our day, and instead of approaching things as negative as you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that and you shouldn't do that, from talking the age of 0 to like 15, to 0 to 9, 0 to 12, if we just popped up a little bit and tried something different, and said, instead of saying, don't do this, don't do that, you shouldn't do this, you're dumb for this, just said, hey, listen, man, you're a smart kid. Have you tried doing this instead? And staying consistent with it. Staying absolutely consistent with it. One of the biggest things when I say something, do something, be consistent, The biggest thing with that, and this is something for all of us to work on, is if you're telling a kid, I don't want you to do this behavior, you better not be doing that behavior yourself. Right? You can't do that. So if you're telling your kid, I want you to study hard every day, I want you to get a good job, you better be doing that. Because they're looking at you to say, well, what is my parent doing? What is my adult doing in my life? So if you're telling your kid you got to study every day and you're watching TV, you got to change who you are. So if that means you got to read a book with them that's going to help you out and build you up, you got to do that. So let's talk about this kid post 18. All right, so now he commits a murder with 3 other guys in another city. Out of these town halls, this is our 23rd. 10 of them, we've had a parent who's lost a child. Out of the 10 parents who lost a child to gang violence, 6 of them were the ones to find their dead kid in the driveway. And when we talk to them, the impact is forever. It's forever. Just last week, a 15-year-old kid, innocent 15-year-old kid, wrong place, wrong time, murdered by a gang member. Is anybody okay with that?
No.
Not at all. Is that tolerated? Should that something we should just tolerate?
No.
Not at all. There should be there's no excuse, there's no justification whatsoever for an innocent person, let alone an innocent kid, to be murdered and killed. Yes, sir. Right, we're collectively saying here is a room. I don't care where you're from, I don't care what agency you're from, I don't care your educational background, I don't care your religious beliefs. None of that stuff matters to me. What matters is we all agree that's not okay. And we have to take that vision and drive that forward. So the reality is, post this, what do we do? And this is what we do. We strategically deploy certain strategies. So these are the risk factors, right? You got family, school, peer group. And what we know works here is, even though this is gang prevention task force, there's 4 big pillars we have. 4 massive pillars, and I'll explain 3 of them right here. Prevention. All right, prevention's it's a buzzword that everybody uses right now because it's great to do, and it's in every industry. It's in law enforcement, it's in health, it's in business, it's prevention. It sounds great to say we want to prevent disease, all right? In this case here, if you want to really prevent that kid from becoming a gang member, evidence-based, meaning that strategies that have been tried and tested and true in the world, they work the most effective and the best between the ages of 0 to 9 and 0 to 12. So the prevention strategies that we really want to deploy in the city going forward over the next couple of years are focusing on kids between the ages of 0 to 12 to prevent them from falling into this life in the first place. It's mitigating those risk factors with protective factors collectively. Not just the police, we're talking about everybody through the influence and motivation you have in your own communities to say, hey, we have to mitigate this from 0 to 12. Let's just focus on this group for now, and let's use strategies that work. And the strategies that work are super simple, they're not expensive, and we can have other agencies help out with it. Now, the second pillar, or the third pillar I should say, is intervention. Okay, so we have prevention from 0 to 12, and intervention is a very important part of the cycle that nobody ever discusses enough. And here's the reason why. There are tens of thousands of people under the age of 18 that are gang involved that are in the criminal justice system right now, and they cannot be ignored. Right? Because if you're a gang member, you are at a substantially higher risk to reoffend. You're also at a substantially higher risk to commit more crime, and you're also at a higher risk to recruit young kids. So if we don't aggressively go after the pocket of thousands of people involved in the criminal gang lifestyle that are in custody now and figure out how to erase those risk factors and start mitigating protective factors that work between the ages of 12 and 18, we're going to let the cycle continue. It's never going to die. So prevention needs to be attacked aggressively, and intervention needs to be attacked as aggressive, if not more, to ensure that when you're out of jail, there's opportunities for you. We conducted a gap analysis with Humber College, which is, we looked at 3 neighborhoods in the West End, 1 neighborhood in the East End, and we looked at all the social services. And we said, where are the gaps in service being, when you have all these services and you have community members, particularly young people between the ages of 0 to 18, what's the disconnect between them and you? Like, where are the gaps? So we funded it, we paid for it, we have it published. It's on our website at torontogangprevention.ca. And one of the biggest highlights that came out of there is, if you're an 18-year-old male and you're out of jail, there is nothing for you. Nothing. Now think of our prison population, think of the gang-involved people. We know statistically about 90% of the gang members in Toronto right now are males. So if we have them approaching the age of 18 and they're getting out of jail and there's nothing for them, we got to change some stuff. We got to start looking at how do we engage them in a positive way to ensure that they don't continue the cycle. And the very last part is suppression, which is the simplest thing for 15 and up. And this works, and these are all evidence-based strategies, which means that the most violent people, being the 10% of all gang members that are gang members for life, the 10% that commit 100% of the criminal decision-making, they need to be arrested and in custody. There is no back place for this right now. We don't have it yet. And then why I say the 10% is there was a study done of a gang in Los Angeles, 300 gang members. And after the study was done, they had put down and said 10% of the gang members, or 30 of them, were responsible for all of the criminal decision making. The other 270 gang members, or 90%, left the gang on their own within 2 years. And none of them faced repercussions. The gang was actually happy that they left. So when you had the 90% saying to the 10% after 2 or 3 years, hey man, listen, I got into university, I got into college, I got a girlfriend, I got a job, listen, I was shot at, I'm not in this anymore. They said, yeah man, you got better things to do in your life, go. But the 10%, generally speaking, if you're over the age of 21 and you're a gang member, you're in a gang for life right now. That's what we're looking at statistically speaking. There's no coming back. Now here's the thing. When we say they need to be incarcerated and be kept in jail, it's because that's the only place we're going to have some control on what every day looks like. You cannot service them or attack their needs or figure out what's wrong with them if they're left out in the wild. Because they're going to continue to do what they do, which is shoot and kill innocent people, conduct drive-by shootings, traffic in underage girls and sex trafficking, deal in drugs, break into homes, continue to intimidate and terrorize communities. That cannot be tolerated. That can't be done. So us as the police, our focus is going to be on that 10% most violent as opposed to the 100%. We have to hold everybody accountable for what you do, but we're going to start changing how we do things. If we can identify if you're part of the 10%, we're going to go hard at you. If you're part of that 90%, we're going to go 50% at you, and the other 50%, we want to help you. We're always going to be offering help to anybody unconditionally. However, you have to participate with us. So when we're dealing with those gang members, it's accepting and understanding that, hey, part of gang prevention is actually arresting gang members, going after them hard and aggressively and letting them know, listen, it's us. Here's the big thing that I don't think anybody realizes, and we go out and we lecture many different organizations. I want you to think about this, all right? This life cycle of gangs. This is why it's so important that it's the police and the community that has to drive this, the police and the community. Imagine gangs are a sandwich. That bottom bread, that's you guys. It's the community. It's the families from which these gang members come from. They're as impacted as anybody else. The gang members cannot exist without that bottom piece of bread being their family. And in between that bread is a bunch of toppings. All right, you have like lettuce, tomato, mayo, whatever you're into, who cares? It's all these toppings in the inside. And that could be schools, it could be community housing, it could be the city of Toronto, it could be jails, it could be social services. Whatever you want to put in that sandwich, put it in there. But at the very top of that sandwich is another piece of bread, and that's the police. All right, and why I put that there and why I explain it that way is everybody in the middle, whenever there's an issue, they could say somebody else is going to deal with it. Somebody else will deal with it. Oh, it's too difficult for me. Let's just let it pass through and somebody else will deal with it. The bottom layer, that's always there. You're always going to be there. That top layer, the police, the reality is when you get to really bad violence, when you get to really bad criminal gang things, there's nothing after us. There's nothing after us. So for us, it's a very heightened sense of responsibility to say, okay, we are the hard stop. But the idea is now to engage that middle pocket of ingredients and say, hey, you just can't pass this off. It's not fair to the rest of us. We need to stop this at an earlier age. All those pillars, I'll skip past this. We'd found a model, all right? And this model we took from the United States, and I'm almost done, and we'll get to an open conversation. But this model in the United States says, listen, if you really want to attack this problem, the problem being gang violence and the secondary problem being gangs in general, you cannot do this with just the community and the police on its own. We need to be the drivers. But what you really need to do is you need to engage all of these organizations. You need to engage all the people from that 0 to 21 that hit this person up, being schools, local service providers, us, the police, criminal justice entities being the courts, probation and parole, jails, everybody and anybody that's involved in the legal side of things, municipal government being the city of Toronto, community housing, provincial government and federal government. And within this, there's about 30 or 40 agencies that we've been talking to say, hey, you got to come on board. We cannot just let this grow. If you see a problem, you got to deal with it in a positive way to mitigate the risk. These are some of the agencies we've spoken to over the last 3 years, all right? And this has doubled in size. And it's the ones I just spoke to you about fixing this problem. But the reality is it's right here. This has to be the driving force, both the police and the community. More importantly, you. And I'll tell you the power that you have that you don't even realize is your voting population. All right, I'm a police officer. It doesn't matter. I'm also a Bollywood model potentially, but I'm just a police officer. I don't have the same influence you have. You guys, I don't think you understand what a collective group of citizens can actually do if you get over the divisiveness of us versus them. That has to stop, like 100% has to stop. You need to really change the language of it's this person's fault, it's that person's fault, and say, we need to come together to fix this. What do we do from here and for tomorrow? Not what happened yesterday. We're never going to change that.
But you-
Again, we're repeating that record. Okay, I got the point loud and clear, but here's the thing.
When you, when,
Wait, let me ask you
Well,
something.
that's-
Let me ask you something. So they get evicted. Where do they go?
Done.
We talk. Listen, I got to stop you here. We cannot do this all night. We've talked about this like ad nauseum, and we got to stop. The reason being is we can listen to you, and I understand your concerns, but we can either listen to 10 minutes of this, or we can give everybody a 1 minute chance or 2 minute chance, and hear 10 people. And the honesty is, we'll talk to you. We can connect you with an officer. We can hear you out and work with you locally, but we got to get past this issue today. So I'm gonna have to just stop you there. So, and then we can deal with you afterwards. So. That is my stuff on Twitter and Instagram. By all means, I always pop up stuff on there. You can connect with me. But yes, sir. Yeah. So all this stuff, and you bring up a really valid point. The exercise we did at the beginning when I said, we described that gang member, we described that. So this is the 23rd town hall. We've done this in about 21 of them. Out of the 21 of them, 18 have given the same description. The community, not me. You know what that description was? It was a 15-year-old black male. And the reason we do that is because in the West End, that's what the community thinks. And what we do is we do the same thing with police officers, and we correct that. We say, that's not true. That is not true. We don't know that. So the back end to all this stuff, and the reason we do that is at the end of this, of these town halls, I am going to write personally a recommendations report back to the Toronto Police Services Board, who governs the police, and saying, out of all these town halls, these are all the things we're learning and ways that we can improve. The reason I brought this up was these are like 5 ingredients that sit all the way through. And one of the biggest ingredients for us is organizational change and development. All right, we're not stupid. I know I'm not going to ever tell you we're perfect. We've made a ton of mistakes. We being the Toronto Police, we've been in some of the most gang impacted communities, and some of the horror stories I hear from people's experiences with the police from 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that they're still living today, they're unacceptable. But all this stuff we're talking about today, it doesn't just mean we're saying to everybody else, you got to change and we got to fix it. It's a massive for us on the inside to say, hey man, we're not catching up quick enough. And really, some of the small, not so small, but stuff where it comes down to officer training and education and experience and exposure, that's a massive part of this for us. It's such an important part for myself and for my partners out there to take all of this collective experience. Even for myself, it's been a massive learning opportunity the last 5 months to say, oh man, I had no idea the impacts of the way I did things, right? To saying exactly what you're saying, the way I might have done something to somebody, and then what impact that might have had on 30 people, right? Because they go back and they say, man, yo, that guy's crazy. Like, don't even talk to him, man. I don't like the way he talked to me. And for us on our end, it's some of the times it's absolute ignorance. Other times it's just innocent. We didn't know any better because we never had a chance to have a conversation like this to say, oh, I didn't know that's the way things were taken. That whole bicycle example I gave you for a high theft, high value to the family, but low priority to us, that I didn't know until I heard it from somebody, and I go, oh man, that makes complete sense. So we take something as small as that, and we come back to police officers and say, hey, listen, that bicycle is of like massive value to this family, so you can't come in there with some nonchalant attitude like, okay, just tell me about the bike, and okay, like, you got to treat it of equal value, because down the road, that family, if they don't think you can even catch a stolen bike, you're not going to take that serious. What do you think they're going to do when there's a murder? And that's the reality. So, yeah, actually, you know who, and it's particularly, I'll tell you, it's particularly with minority groups as well, right? It's like black youth, brown youth, Latin youth. There's like all these different, have a different relationship with police traditionally. And where's Musa? Is he here? Musa might have a better take on that in terms of okay. So Musa, so he's talking about like relationships between the police and like minority groups and the distrust and all that stuff. And I thought maybe you had a different, or you might be able to answer that a little better in terms of the consultative work you do.